The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the high-end diner, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Trisha Parker moved through the elegant space with practiced efficiency, her dark blue uniform crisp against her brown skin, the white collar and apron a stark contrast that made her both visible and invisible at once. She refilled water glasses and adjusted silverware with fluid, economical movements, a quiet ghost among the city's elite who dined on imported delicacies and whispered about million-dollar deals. Then the entrance doors swung open, heavy and deliberate. The diner fell into a suffocating silence. He walked in first, a man carved from shadow and steel. His black turtleneck and coat were tailored so precisely they seemed a part of him, an extension of the darkness he carried. His name was Hwan Ja-young, and it was spoken in hushed tones in places like this, a legend made flesh. The formidable Korean Mafia boss who controlled the city's underground with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. Dragon tattoos crawled up his neck and across the backs of his hands, ancient symbols of power that marked him as untouchable, unreachable, untamed. 3 men flanked him, built like monuments of muscle and menace, their eyes sweeping the restaurant with cold, professional detachment. They moved to the corner booth, the one with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen doors, the one that offered control and escape in equal measure. Trisha felt the shift in atmosphere, the air crackling with sudden, dangerous pressure. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to muffle themselves in deference to the threat that had just walked through the door. But her heart didn't race. Instead, a strange, cold calm settled into her veins like ice water. She had been waiting for this, not for him specifically, but for a moment exactly like this, for the moment when the old ways would be needed again, when her mother's dying words would finally make sense. When the sun of shadow sits before you, remember what I taught you. Remember the signal. Remember who you are. She picked up a leather-bound menu and a small notepad, her expression placid, serene, betraying nothing of the storm gathering inside her chest. Her hair was pulled back into a tight professional bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, the unwavering discipline in her posture. To anyone watching, she was the perfect portrait of a subservient worker, a girl who knew her place in a world of powerful men. As she approached their table, she kept her gaze respectfully lowered, her steps measured and deliberate. The bodyguards tracked her movement, hands subtly shifting toward concealed weapons, but she gave them nothing to react to, just a maid doing her job. "Good evening," she said softly, her voice steady as stone. "May I start you with something to drink?" But as she stood beside the booth, extending the menu toward Hwan Ja-young with her right hand, her left hand, the one holding the notepad against her hip, made a movement so subtle it could have been a tremor, a nervous flutter, nothing at all. Beneath the table's edge, hidden from the view of his guards, she executed the signal. A slow, deliberate press of her middle finger to the fleshy base of her thumb, held for a single resonant second, an ancient, forgotten gesture, a ghost of a promise, a vow to see what others miss. On her inner wrist, partially visible beneath her sleeve, a small tattoo marked her as something more than she appeared, a symbol that matched the one Ja-young's father had shown him only once, 20 years ago, before the old man died. Ja-young's eyes, dark and depthless as the ocean at midnight, had been fixed on the menu, his expression a mask of cold granite and utter disinterest. But out of the corner of his vision, he caught the movement. It was nothing, a flicker, a nervous habit a girl like her might have while serving a man like him. Yet it was not. The pressure, the duration, the specific placement. It was a key turning in a lock he hadn't touched in decades, a door he thought had been sealed forever when his father's generation died off and took their paranoid legends with them. His posture didn't change, not by a single millimeter, but a stillness descended over him that was more terrifying than any overt threat, a predator's absolute focus before the strike. His enforcers felt it immediately, their bodies tensing in response to their leader's silent command, hands moving inside jackets, eyes scanning for the threat they couldn't see. He lifted his gaze from the menu and finally looked at her. Truly looked at her. He saw the crisp polyester of her uniform, too perfect, too deliberate. The faint exhaustion shadowing her eyes, the kind that came from carrying unfathomable debts. And beneath all of that, impossibly, the unwavering calm in their depths, a calm that didn't belong to a 24-year-old maid serving lunch to the city's most dangerous man. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that moment she slipped a folded piece of paper beneath the menu, her movements so smooth they seemed like nothing more than adjusting the leather binding. "The salmon is excellent today," she said, her voice still soft, still perfectly subservient, but her words carried weight, each syllable carefully chosen. "Though I'd recommend avoiding anything with Arthur's special seasoning. It tends to be deadly." She stepped back, gave a small professional nod, and turned to walk away. Ja-young's hand shot out, not grabbing her waist, but hovering just beside it, a gesture that made every gun in the restaurant shift in his direction. "What?" he said, his voice low and lethal, each word carved from ice. "What is your name?" She paused, turned her head just slightly, enough to show the profile of her face against the afternoon light. "Trisha Parker, sir." A beat of silence, heavy with meaning. "My mother's name was Sarah. She used to work in your father's kitchen a long time ago." The paper beneath the menu seemed to burn against the table. Ja-young released the air around her wrist without ever touching it, and she walked away, disappearing into the kitchen like smoke, like a ghost, like a listener who had just delivered a message that would either save his life or end it. He unfolded the paper with fingers that didn't shake, though his enforcers later swore they'd never seen their boss move with such careful precision. 7 words, written in elegant handwriting that looked too educated for a diner maid. "They sent Arthur to kill you tonight. Welcome to Afro Soul Storybook. Subscribe to watch more of our daily stories, and comment where you're watching."
Beneath it, an address he recognized, the Riverside Warehouse, the meeting location he'd chosen himself, told to only 5 people. Arthur was one of them. Ja-young stood, the movement smooth and controlled, and his men rose with him like extensions of his will. He left $300 bills on the table, far more than the menu cost, far less than the information was worth, and walked toward the kitchen. The staff parted for him like water around stone. He found Trisha in the back, untying her apron with methodical precision, as if she'd been expecting him. "Walk with me," he said, not a request. She nodded, folding the apron neatly over her arm, and followed him out the service entrance, into an alley that smelled of old grease and rain-soaked concrete. His guards formed a perimeter, blocking both ends of the alley, creating a pocket of privacy in the heart of the city. "My father never told me names," Ja-young said, studying her face in the harsh afternoon light. "Just that the listeners existed, that they were everywhere and nowhere, that they saw what others missed." He circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "I thought he was paranoid, senile, inventing fairy tales to make sense of his survival." "He wasn't," Trisha said simply. Her voice was different now, stripped of the subservient softness. It carried an authority that didn't match her uniform or her age. "The listeners were real, are real. We just learned to become even quieter after your father died. Why reveal yourself now? Because the old ways are needed again. She met his eyes without fear, without calculation, just stating facts. Your organization has grown too loud, Mr. Wan, too visible. You've built an empire on force and fear, and that attracts a certain kind of attention, a certain kind of ambition. She paused, letting the words settle. Arthur believes the future belongs to those who are quieter, more surgical, and he's convinced 4 of your other lieutenants that you are a liability. Jae Yong's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the rage building beneath his controlled exterior. You have proof? I have what my mother taught me to collect: whispers, patterns, the things people say when they think no one important is listening. She reached into her pocket slowly, giving his guards time to track the movement, and pulled out a small digital recorder. Arthur's been meeting with a supplier from the Zhao family. They're offering him distribution routes in exchange for removing you from the equation. Tonight's meeting was supposed to be your execution, dressed up as a rival ambush. She pressed play. Arthur's voice, unmistakable, filled the alley. The words were careful, coded, but the intent was clear. Betrayal wrapped in justification, ambition dressed as pragmatism. When the recording ended, Jae-dong stood perfectly still for 3 heartbeats. Then he took the recorder, slipped it into his coat, and fixed Trisha with a look that could strip paint. "If you're lying to me," he said quietly, "I will make you wish you'd never learned your mother's secrets." "I'm not lying," Trisha said, "and you know it. That signal I used, your father taught it to my mother when I was 6 years old. It was a promise, a vow. When the son of shadow needs the truth, a listener will speak it, no matter the cost." Jae-young considered this, his mind working through angles and contingencies with the speed that had kept him alive in a world designed to kill men like him. "Why now?" he asked again. "Your mother's been dead. How long?" 3 years, Trisha said softly. "I've been watching you since then, waiting. My mother made me promise that I would honor the old agreement if the time came, if you were ever truly in danger from within." She smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "She said your father told her that you would either revolutionize the underworld or be consumed by it. She wanted to make sure you had a chance to choose which." The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. Finally, Jae-young spoke, his voice carrying a new edge, not threat, but challenge. "Tonight, midnight. The old textile factory by the river, the one with the collapsed east wing." He watched her reaction carefully. "Meet me there. Come alone. If you're who you claim to be, if you're truly a listener, you'll find a way to get there without being seen, without being followed." It was a test. The factory was in hostile territory, abandoned and dangerous, surrounded by gang checkpoints and surveillance, a place where someone could disappear and never be found. "And if I don't?" Trisha asked. "Then I'll know you're just a clever girl with a recording and a death wish." He turned to leave, his coat billowing behind him like wings. "I'll be there," Trisha said to his back. "And Mr. Wan, when I am, you'll owe me the same thing your father owed my mother. Your attention, your trust." She paused, "and a chance to finish what they started." Jae-young didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders shift, acknowledgement or dismissal, she couldn't tell. He walked away, his guards falling in around him, and within seconds they'd disappeared around the corner, leaving Trisha alone in the alley, with nothing but the recorder's empty silence and the weight of her mother's legacy pressing against her chest. She looked at her watch. 7 hours until midnight. 7 hours to navigate forgotten pathways, to move through the city's invisible spaces, to prove that she was exactly what she claimed to be. 7 hours to reach a skeletal ruin by the river, or die trying. She tied her apron back on, smoothed her uniform, and walked back into the diner. Her shift wasn't over yet, and listeners didn't break routine. They didn't draw attention. They simply observed, recorded, and when the moment demanded it, they acted. Tonight would demand everything.
But first, there were tables to clear and coffee to refill. There was the ordinary world to maintain, because that was where the truth lived, in the spaces between power, in the margins of other people's wars. She picked up a rag and began wiping down the counter, her movements automatic, her mind already mapping routes through service tunnels and abandoned subway passages, through the city's forgotten architecture. She thought of her mother, who had moved through the world like water, never making a splash, but always leaving ripples. "We don't change the world, Trisha," her mother had told her once, near the end, when the cancer had hollowed her out but hadn't touched her mind. "We just make sure the people who do have the right information to change it well, or to survive the changing." The diner door chimed. New customers entered, oblivious to the fact that their world had just shifted on its axis. Trisha greeted them with a smile, took their order with practiced efficiency, and disappeared into the rhythm of service. But beneath the calm surface, her heart was counting down. 7 hours, then the river, then the truth of whether she was her mother's daughter, or just a girl playing with fire in a world made of gasoline. The city's surface belonged to the powerful, but its depths belonged to those who knew how to listen. Trisha descended into those depths at exactly 10:47 p.m., slipping through a service entrance behind the diner that most people walked past 1,000 times without noticing. The metal blur, rusted and unmarked, led to a maintenance corridor that connected to the old subway system, the parts that had been closed since the expansion 20 years ago, the parts the city had simply built over and forgotten. She'd changed out of her uniform into dark clothes that absorbed light, practical boots that made no sound against concrete, a fitted jacket with enough pockets to carry what she needed. The small recorder was gone, delivered to a safe location. In its place, she carried a flashlight, a folding knife her mother had given her, and a rolled set of building schematics she'd spent 3 years collecting. The tunnel smelled of standing water and old electricity. Graffiti covered the walls in layers, archaeological strata of the city's forgotten voices. She moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every inch of these passages, who knew which turns led to dead ends and which opened into the network of maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the entire downtown like veins beneath skin. 40 minutes of walking through spaces where sound died and echoes lived, past homeless encampments where she nodded to familiar faces who knew better than to ask questions, through sections where water dripped from ceiling pipes in rhythms that sounded almost like Morse code, down corridors where the city's infrastructure hummed and rattled, keeping the world above running while remaining completely invisible. She emerged from a storm drain 3 blocks from the textile factory, exactly on schedule. Midnight minus 15 minutes. The factory rose against the night sky like a broken skeleton, its windows empty sockets, its walls scarred by fire and time. The east wing had collapsed inward years ago, creating a maze of twisted metal and unstable floors. The west wing still stood, barely, a testament to construction standards from an era when things were built to last forever, even in ruin. Trisha circled the perimeter, staying in shadows, reading the landscape the way her mother had taught her. 2 men posted at the main entrance, trying to look casual but scanning the street with military precision. Another on the roof of the adjacent building, sniper position. 3 more she couldn't see but knew had to be there, covering the blind spots. Arthur's men, or men Arthur had borrowed from the Zhao family. Either way, this wasn't a meeting, it was an execution ground. Trisha found what she was looking for on the south side, a gap in the chain-link fence hidden by overgrown weeds, leading to a collapsed loading dock that opened into the factory's basement level. She squeezed through, her jacket catching briefly on wire before pulling free, and descended into deeper darkness. The basement was a catacomb of storage rooms and old machinery, most of it seized by rust and time. But Trisha had studied the original construction plans, had traced the building's history back through 3 owners and 2 fires. She knew that the second floor, where Jae Yong would likely position himself for tactical advantage, was supported by a series of load-bearing beams that had been weakened by the east wing collapse. She knew that the old conveyor system, though dormant for a decade, was still partially intact, its motors and gears connected to a central power junction that maintenance workers had never bothered to fully disconnect. She knew, in other words, how to make the building speak, how to make it scream.
She climbed through the interior, avoiding the main stairwells, using maintenance ladders and service catwalks that groaned under her weight but held. The second floor was a vast open space, once filled with industrial looms, now home to nothing but shadows and the scattered evidence of squatters long gone. At exactly midnight, she heard the footsteps. Jae-young entered from the west entrance alone, as promised, his silhouette sharp against the faint light filtering through broken windows. He moved to the center of the floor, to a spot where he could see all approaches, where his back was protected by a support column. He waited. Trisha remained in the rafters above, perfectly still, watching. She'd positioned herself near the conveyor system's main junction, where decades of dust covered the control panel she'd spent an hour breaking into and rewiring. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. Then the trap sprung. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, Arthur leading from the east, 4 men Trisha recognized as Jae-young's own security detail emerging from the north, and 3 Zhao family soldiers appearing from the south stairwell. 10 men total, all armed, all closing the distance with practiced coordination. "Jae-young," Arthur called out, his voice carrying false warmth across the empty space. "I'm glad you came. We need to talk about the future." "We do," Jae-young agreed, his hands visible, empty, unthreatening. But Trisha could see the way he'd shifted his weight, the way his eyes tracked each man's position. He knew, of course he knew. The question was what he'd do about it. "The organization has outgrown the old methods. Your father built an empire on fear and force. You've maintained it, but the world's changing. We need to be smarter, quieter." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "We need new leadership."
"And you think that's you?" Jae-young asked, his voice carrying no emotion, just curiosity. "I think it's us." Arthur gestured to the men surrounding them. "A collective. No more one-man rule, no more dragon tattoos and legendary reputations. Just business. Clean, efficient, profitable." "Boring," Jae-young said flatly. Arthur's smile disappeared. "Last chance to step aside quietly. There's a boat leaving for Taiwan in 3 hours. Take it, disappear, live out your life somewhere else. Or—" He raised his gun, and 9 others rose with it, a forest of barrels all pointed at one man. "We end this the loud way." Jae-young didn't move. "You forgot something, Arthur." "What's that?" "I didn't come alone." The confusion on Arthur's face was almost comical. His eyes darted around the empty factory, searching for the backup that logic said should be there, but eyes said wasn't. "You're bluffing," Arthur said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Am I?" Jae-young's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You spent so much time planning this trap, you forgot the first rule my father taught me. Never trust what you can see. Trust what you can't." In the rafters, Trisha's hand moved to the rewired control panel. She'd spent the last hour tracing power lines, reconnecting circuits, and rigging a sequence that would have made her mother proud. The conveyor system was dead, yes, but its motors were still connected to the building's skeletal electrical grid, and those motors, when activated in the right sequence, would create a resonance in the weakened support structure, a vibration, a cascading mechanical failure that would turn the building itself into a weapon. She pressed the first switch. Deep in the building's bones, something growled to life. The sound was wrong, industrial and agonized, metal scraping against metal after years of stillness. The floor shuddered. Arthur's men spun, trying to locate the source of the noise, their gun barrels wavering from their target. Trisha pressed the second switch. The conveyor system's main belt, 3 floors below, began to move, slowly at first, then faster, its ancient motors straining against rust and decay. The vibration intensified, traveling through the support beams, amplifying in the hollows where the east wing collapse had created structural weakness. "What the hell?" Arthur started to say. Trisha pressed the third switch, and the building screamed. The sound was apocalyptic, grinding metal, snapping cables, the groaning protest of a structure that had been sleeping and now being forced awake.
The floor didn't collapse, not yet, but it rippled like water, throwing men off balance, sending weapons clattering from hands as they grabbed for support that wasn't there. In the chaos, Jae-young moved. He was a shadow made flesh, flowing between the stumbling gunmen with lethal precision. The first man went down with a knife in his throat before he'd finished falling. The second took a bullet from his own partner's gun as Jae-young used him as a shield. The third found his weapon turned against him, Jae-young's hand guiding it back towards its owner with casual violence. Arthur fired wildly, his shots going wide as the floor bucked beneath him. He was screaming orders that no one could follow, his carefully planned execution dissolving into a symphony of destruction. Trisha pressed the final switch. The conveyor system's emergency brake released, and 3 tons of metal belt lashed free like a steel whip. It tore through the floor above the main junction, sending a cascade of debris down onto the second floor. Support beams, already weakened, gave way with sounds like breaking bones. A section of ceiling collapsed, not on Jae-young. Trisha had calculated the fall pattern precisely, but on the cluster of Zhao soldiers to the south, burying them under concrete and rebar. The building was eating itself, and Trisha was conducting the meal. She swung down from the rafters on a maintenance cable, her boots hitting the floor just as Arthur raised his gun towards Jae-young's back. She didn't hesitate. The knife her mother had given her flew from her hand with the precision of 1,000 practice throws, embedding itself in Arthur's shoulder. He spun, shock and pain contorting his features, and Jae-young finished what Trisha had started. One shot, clean, efficient. Arthur dropped, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with the betrayal he'd planned for someone else. The surviving traitors ran, abandoning their weapons, their loyalty, their coup. They scattered into the darkness, and Jae-young let them go. They were messages now, living proof of what happened to those who forgot that the dragon's power wasn't in his roar, but in his ability to vanish and strike from angles you never saw coming. The building shuddered once more, then fell silent. The conveyor system's motors burned out, releasing smoke that smelled of ozone and ancient oil. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Jae-young turned to Trisha, who stood amid the wreckage breathing hard, dust covering her dark clothes, her hair escaping from its tight bun. "You came," Jae-young said, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Not quite respect, not quite trust, but recognition. "I gave my word," Trisha replied, retrieving her knife from Arthur's still form. She wiped it clean on his jacket, the gesture matter-of-fact, unsentimental. Jae-young stepped over debris, moving closer to her in the dim light filtering through the destruction they'd created together. "That signal," he said quietly, "the one you used in the diner. My father showed it to me once, only once. I was 7 years old and he'd just survived an assassination attempt, the 3rd one that year." He paused, and something ancient moved behind his eyes. He said that a woman named Sarah had warned him, that she'd used that gesture to prove she was a listener, that her information could be trusted absolutely. He made me practice it until I could recognize it in my sleep.
"Why?" Trisha asked. "Because he said that someday, when I'd forgotten everything he taught me, when I'd grown arrogant on my own power, a listener would come again, would use that signal, and I would know that everything I thought I'd built on my own was really built on a foundation they'd been maintaining all along." His smile was bitter. "I thought he was being dramatic, sentimental. I thought the listeners were just glorified informants if they existed at all." "We're not informants," Trisha said. "We're architects. We don't report what we see, we shape what others are able to see in the first place." She met his eyes. "Your father understood that. He understood that real power isn't force, it's information, context, the ability to make your enemies destroy themselves while you watch from the shadows." "And you want to teach me that?" Jae-young asked. "I want to finish what our parents started," Trisha corrected. "Your father had vision. He understood that the underworld could be more than territory wars and body counts, but he didn't have the tools to make that vision real. My mother had the tools, the network, the intelligence, the invisible infrastructure, but she didn't have the power to implement them." She stepped closer,
close enough that he could have killed her with a gesture, close enough that she could have done the same to him. Together, she said, we could build something neither of our parents could have imagined, not a gang, not even an organization, an empire built on information, on shadows, on the ability to see and shape events before anyone knows they're being shaped. Why should I trust you? Jae Young asked. You could be playing a deeper game. This could all be theater designed to get close to me. You shouldn't trust me, Trisha said simply. Not yet. Trust is earned through action, through time, through surviving things together. She gestured at the wreckage around them. But you should believe me, because I just saved your life using nothing but knowledge of building schematics and electrical systems. Imagine what I could do with resources, with backing, with a partner who understands that the future doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room, but to the one who controls what voices get heard in the first place. Sirens were getting closer. They needed to leave. But Jae Young didn't move, still assessing, still calculating the angles and probabilities. Finally, he spoke. 3 days. My penthouse. We'll talk about the future. If I like what I hear, we'll talk about partnership. If I don't, you'll tell me, Trisha finished. I understand. It's what my mother would have expected. Your mother was wise, Jae Young said. My mother was terrified. Every day of her life, she was afraid that someone would see through her invisibility, would recognize what she was, would end the game before she was ready. Fear made her careful. Careful made her survive. I inherited both. They left the factory through different exits, Trisha melting back into the service tunnels, Jae Young disappearing into a car that hadn't been there moments before. The building burned behind them, evidence destroying itself, Arthur's betrayal turning to ash. 3 days later, Trisha stood in a penthouse 40 stories above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made the downtown district look like a circuit board, all lights and patterns and hidden connections. Jae Young sat across from her at a glass table that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. He'd shed the black coat and turtleneck for a charcoal suit that made him look less like a monster and more like a businessman. But the dragon tattoos still crawled up his neck, reminders that beneath the polish, the predator remained. Show me, he said, without preamble, this empire you think we can build. Trisha opened the leather portfolio she'd brought and spread documents across the table, not financial records or organizational charts, but something more fundamental, maps of information flow. Your current operation moves product through force and fear. You control territory by holding it, by having more guns than your rivals, by being willing to be more violent than anyone else. She tapped the first map. This works. It's worked for 3 generations. But it's also expensive, loud, and increasingly vulnerable to law enforcement and rival organizations who've learned to match your violence. Jae Young nodded slowly, listening. The listeners operate on a different principle. We don't hold territory, we hold knowledge. We know who's selling what to whom. We know which politicians are corrupt and which are genuinely idealistic. We know which businesses are fronts and which are legitimate. We know shipping schedules, security rotations, personal weaknesses, family secrets. She spread another map, this one showing a web of connections that made the city look like a living organism. This knowledge is power, but it's useless without someone who can act on it. And you want me to be that someone, Jae Young said. I want us to be that something. You provide the structure, the enforcement, the visible power. I provide the intelligence that makes that power surgical instead of blunt, efficient instead of wasteful, invisible instead of notorious. She pulled out a tablet and brought up a presentation she'd spent 3 sleepless nights preparing. Here's how it works. The listeners identify targets, not territories but leverage points. A shipping company that's 1 bad quarter from bankruptcy, a politician with a gambling problem, a rival organization with internal conflicts they haven't acknowledged yet. We collect this information, verify it, package it. Then you move.
Not with soldiers and guns, but with offers, solutions, strategic partnerships that our targets don't even realize are cages until they're locked inside.
Jiayong leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. Example: the Zhao family. Trisha said immediately. They're your biggest rival for port access. You could go to war with them, expensive, bloody, uncertain outcome, or she pulled up financial records that shouldn't have been available to anyone outside the Zhao organization. We could leverage the fact that their eldest son has been embezzling from their operations for 18 months to fund a cryptocurrency scheme that's about to collapse spectacularly. We give this information to the Zhao patriarch anonymously as a gesture of goodwill and suggest that you'd be willing to provide temporary port access while they handle their internal reorganization. They're grateful. You're generous, and by the time they stabilize, they're dependent on your infrastructure and can't afford to challenge you without hurting themselves. And you know this because my mother trained me to watch, to listen, to see patterns in financial data and shipping manifests and overheard conversations. Trisha smiled. Because I've been working as a maid and a waitress in establishments frequented by the city's elite for 6 years. Because people don't see service workers. They talk around us, through us, as if we're furniture, and we remember everything. Jiayong was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city he'd controlled through fear and force, the city that was slowly outgrowing those methods. My father built an empire on blood and loyalty, he said finally. I've maintained it the same way. But you're right, the world's changing. The old methods are too loud, too expensive, too vulnerable. He turned back to her. What you're proposing is a different kind of empire, one built on shadows and information, on manipulation instead of violence. Not instead of, Trisha corrected, in addition to. Violence still has its place, but it should be the last resort, not the first response. A scalpel, not a hammer. And you think you can provide this intelligence network? These listeners? I know I can, Trisha said, because it already exists. My mother built it over 30 years. I've been maintaining it since her death. Right now, it serves no master, collects no payment, operates purely on the principle that information should be preserved and protected, but with resources, with direction, with a partner who understands its value. She let the possibility hang in the air. Jiayong returned to the table, sat down, and extended his hand across the glass surface. His dragon tattoos seemed to writhe in the city lights. Partnership, he said, not employment, not servitude. Equal partnership. Your network provides intelligence, my organization provides action. We split profits, share risks, make decisions together. Trisha looked at the offered hand, at the man behind it, at the empire they could build if they didn't destroy each other first. She took his hand. Partnership, she agreed, with one condition. Which is? The listeners remain invisible, always. No public acknowledgement, no records. We're the crown, not the throne. The power behind the power. The moment people know we exist, we lose our value. Jiayong considered this and then nodded. Agreed. You're the architect. I'm the builder. The world sees the structure, never the blueprint. They shook, the gesture binding them in a pact that was either the beginning of something revolutionary or the start of a war that would consume them both. Where do we start? Jiayong asked. Trisha smiled and pulled up another file on her tablet. With the people who killed Arthur. They think they got away clean. They think you'll be too busy consolidating power to come after them. Trisha's smile sharpened. We show them the difference between revenge and architecture. We dismantle them so completely, so quietly, that the rest of the underworld never even knows it happened. We turn them into a lesson that no one sees, but everyone learns. Jiayong's answering smile was cold and precise. I'm listening. And in that moment, 40 stories above the city, surrounded by glass and steel and the lights of a million unsuspecting lives, Two people who'd inherited legacies of shadow and violence began to build something their parents had only imagined, an empire where information was currency, where invisibility was strength, where the loudest voice in the room was always the one you controlled without anyone knowing you were there. Outside, the city hummed and buzzed, oblivious to the shift happening above it. The old empire was dying, the new one was being born, and the only people who would ever know were the ones who'd learned long ago that real power doesn't announce itself. It just quietly, methodically reshapes the world.